Imagine owning one of the largest scrap yards in your region. Every morning, trucks begin arriving before the day has fully started. They carry wrecked cars, broken washing machines, rusted steel beams, damaged machinery, and piles of old metal. Within a few hours, the yard is filled with materials that most people would consider completely worthless. From the outside, it doesn't look like a successful business. It looks like an enormous collection of junk. Dust fills the air. Metal is stacked in every direction. Everything appears old, broken, and forgotten. Yet behind those towering piles of scrap is a business generating millions of dollars every year. At first glance, the business seems surprisingly simple. People bring in old metal. The scrap yard buys it, then it sells it again. Repeat the process every day. It almost sounds too easy. When you see mountains of scrap constantly arriving and trucks leaving fully loaded, it's easy to believe the business is simply buying low and selling high. But that's only the visible part of the operation, because not every pile of scrap has the same value, and not every piece of metal is worth keeping. The real business begins after the trucks stop unloading. That's what makes the scrap industry so fascinating. Most people notice the crushed cars. They notice the rust. They notice the mountains of discarded metal. But those piles aren't the business. They're simply the starting point. Behind every load of scrap is a careful process of identifying valuable materials, separating them, grading them, and preparing them for their next life. The better a scrapyard understands what's hidden inside every shipment, the more valuable that shipment becomes. Because in this industry, success isn't measured by how much junk you collect. It's measured by how much value you can recover. Every business needs inventory. For a grocery store, it's food. For a car dealership, it's vehicles. But for a scrapyard, inventory arrives looking like garbage. Every day, people bring in wrecked cars, broken appliances, construction debris, old machinery, and piles of unwanted metal. Most sellers aren't trying to make a profit. They're simply trying to get rid of something they no longer need. That's where the opportunity begins. Because while the previous owner sees waste, the scrapyard sees the beginning of a new business transaction. But buying scrap isn't as simple as weighing it and handing over cash. Every load is different. One wrecked car may contain valuable aluminum wheels and copper wiring. Another may be filled mostly with low-value steel. A pile of factory leftovers could be worth thousands of dollars, or almost nothing. That's why experience matters. The best scrapyard owners can estimate the value of a load within minutes. They're not buying junk, they're buying the materials hidden inside it. This is why scrapyards don't compete by buying the most material. They compete by buying the right material. Pay too much, and profits disappear. Pay too little, and sellers go somewhere else. Finding the right balance is one of the most important decisions in the business. Every purchase is a calculated risk, because no matter how large the scrapyard becomes, its success will always depend on one simple question. Is this pile of scrap actually worth more than the price you paid for it? Once the scrap enters the yard, its journey is far from over. In fact, this is where the real business begins. At first glance, everything looks like one giant pile of metal. Old cars sit beside washing machines. Steel beams lie next to copper wire. Broken engines are mixed with aluminum parts. But to a scrapyard owner, these materials are anything but identical. Every item contains different metals, different qualities, and different values. Before anything can be sold, every piece must first be identified and separated. Sorting scrap may seem like a simple task, but it's actually one of the most valuable parts of the business. A mixed pile of metal isn't worth nearly as much as carefully separated materials. Copper sells for a very different price than steel. Aluminum has its own market. Brass, stainless steel, and lead are all valued differently. The cleaner and more organized the materials become, the more buyers are willing to pay. In many cases, no new product has been created. The value simply comes from proper organization. This is why knowledge is one of the most valuable tools in a scrapyard. Experience allows workers to recognize valuable materials almost instantly. They know where copper is hidden inside an old appliance, which engines contain aluminum, which parts should be removed before processing. The better they identify each material, the more valuable every shipment becomes. Because in the scrap business, profit doesn't come from changing the metal. It comes from understanding exactly what you're looking at. One old washing machine isn't worth very much. Neither is a single bicycle or one wrecked car. Individually, these items generate only a small amount of profit. That's why scrapyards rarely depend on a few valuable pieces. They depend on volume. Hundreds of vehicles arrive every week. Thousands of appliances. Tons of steel. Miles of copper wire. One load may not change the business, but thousands of loads collected over time create a business capable of processing millions of dollars worth of recyclable materials every year. This is why scrapyards are designed to handle enormous amounts of material every single day. Tow trucks never stop arriving. Industrial suppliers unload truck after truck. Construction companies deliver leftover steel. Factories send production scrap. As one shipment is unloaded, another is already waiting at the entrance. The faster the yard can process incoming material, the faster it can prepare it for resale. In this business, speed and efficiency directly affect how much money the company can earn. The goal isn't to let scrap sit in the yard forever. Every pile takes up valuable space. Every extra day means money is tied up in inventory instead of generating revenue. Successful scrapyards keep materials moving. They buy, sort, process, sell, then repeat the cycle again. The faster that cycle turns, the more profitable the business becomes. Because in the scrap industry, it's not just about what you buy. It's about how quickly you can turn today's scrap into tomorrow's sale. Most people assume scrapyards sell metal to anyone willing to buy it, but that's rarely how the business works. Their biggest customers are usually massive industrial companies. Steel mills melt old steel into brand new beams. Aluminum plants turn scrap into fresh sheets of metal. Copper processors recover valuable wiring for new products. Manufacturers buy recycled materials to produce everything from cars to household appliances. The scrapyard isn't the final destination. It's simply one stop in a much larger supply chain. Every truck leaving the yard is carrying raw materials that will soon become something entirely new. Most people assume scrapyards sell metal to anyone willing to buy it, but that's rarely how the business works. Their biggest customers are usually massive industrial companies. Steel mills melt old steel into brand new beams. Aluminum plants turn scrap into fresh sheets of metal. Copper processors recover valuable wiring for new products. Manufacturers buy recycled materials to produce everything from cars to household appliances. The scrapyard isn't the final destination. It's simply one stop in a much larger supply chain. Every truck leaving the yard is carrying raw materials that will soon become something entirely new. That's why the most valuable customer isn't someone selling scrap. It's the company buying it. A homeowner may bring in one old washing machine. A manufacturer may purchase thousands of tons of recycled metal every year. Those long-term relationships create predictable revenue, and predictable revenue allows the business to grow. Because every satisfied buyer becomes another reason to keep processing more material tomorrow. In the scrap industry, success isn't measured by how much scrap arrives. It's measured by how many customers are waiting for it to leave. At first, it seems like a scrapyard makes money by buying old metal, and technically it does. But if that were the whole business, anyone with an empty lot could become successful. The difference isn't the scrap itself. It's the ability to recognize value that others overlook. A wrecked car isn't just a wrecked car. It's steel, copper, aluminum, plastic, glass, rubber, even valuable electronic components. Every object arriving at the yard is really a collection of individual materials waiting to be recovered. The better the yard understands those materials, the more valuable every shipment becomes. Once you understand this, you begin seeing the world differently. An old washing machine is no longer just an appliance. A demolished bridge isn't simply construction waste. A damaged car isn't just scrap. Everything becomes a collection of reusable resources. What looks like the end of one product's life is actually the beginning of another. The steel becomes part of a new building. The aluminum returns as new vehicle parts. The copper becomes fresh electrical wiring. Very little is truly wasted. It simply changes form. And that's why the economics of a scrapyard are so different from what most people imagine. The mountains of metal attract attention. The crushed cars fill the landscape. The heavy machinery moves endless piles of scrap. But none of those things are the real product. They're simply the raw materials. The true business is recovering value that was always there. Taking something the world has given up on and giving it a second life. Because in the end, a scrapyard doesn't buy garbage. It buys opportunity. And its greatest asset isn't the metal itself. It's the ability to recognize value where everyone else sees none. By now, the business starts to look very different. At the beginning, a scrapyard seemed like a place where old metal was stored, a place full of crushed cars, broken appliances, and rusted machinery. But after looking behind the scenes, something becomes clear. The piles of scrap were never the business. They were simply the raw material. Every truck entering the yard brings hidden value waiting to be discovered. Steel waiting to become new buildings. Copper waiting to power new homes. Aluminum waiting to return to the road. The scrapyard doesn't see the end of a product's life. It sees the beginning of another. Once you understand that idea, you begin noticing it everywhere. Nothing inside the yard is truly worthless. Every object is simply a collection of materials. A refrigerator isn't one product. It's steel, copper, aluminum, plastic, and glass. A wrecked car isn't just a damaged vehicle. It's dozens of valuable resources waiting to be separated. The better a scrapyard can recover those materials, the more valuable every shipment becomes. In this business, knowledge creates value long before anything is recycled. And that's why the economics of a scrapyard are so different from what most people imagine. The excavators, the crushers, the mountains of metal, those are simply the tools. The real business has never been collecting junk. It's recognizing opportunity where everyone else sees waste. Every appliance, every damaged car, every rusted beam, every discarded machine represents another chance to recover something valuable. Because in the end, a scrapyard doesn't buy garbage, it buys hidden value. And every pile of scrap is proof that one person's waste can become someone else's raw material.